If you'd like to talk to Martin Haese, my favourite Lord Mayor of Adelaide, you can pick up your phone and dial 0491 65 68 60. Where are you now that we need you? What are you doing with yourself?
Well, first and foremost, Jeremy, thank you for having me on the program.
It's a great honour that you came. Thank you.
I must say, it's wonderful to be back. So good to be chatting with you. I've always enjoyed it over many years.
No, thank you very much. Thank you. What have you been doing with yourself? Because you were very successful in business long before you went into local government. Have you gone back to that?
I'm largely gravitating back towards business. So I describe myself as somewhat of a hybrid at the moment. So I do a number of things. So I do one role, which I'm absolutely loving, which is a role which is based in Singapore and Southeast Asia, which I'm attracting investment capital into South Australia, into South Australian projects and for South Australian companies. So it's a state-based role. Often these roles are federal, but the very long title which I hold is Special Envoy to Singapore and Southeast Asia for Trade and Investment for the Government of South Australia.
Wonderful. I love Singapore. It's a fabulous, fabulous country, city.
Great city. Yeah. And really going ahead, I must say. But strong ties between Singapore and Australia and indeed South Australia, and my job is to strengthen them further. So trade, investment, tourism, education, collaborations, partnerships between organisations in both countries, those types of things.
You're not finding it hard to stir up interest?
There's interest in Australia.
Yeah.
I think there's a very close fondness between Australia and Singapore.
Yes.
So we have the same legal system, we share the same language, of course, and the cultural ties are very deep, and the historic ties are very deep, and Singapore's a really good hub for Southeast Asia. So a lot of kind of people doing business in Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, those types of countries, which generally are growing, Philippines, will often hub their activities out of Singapore. So Singapore's a good fit in terms of, Southeast Asia is a big place, Jeremy. There's 600 to 700 million people in Southeast Asia across a number of countries.
And they all seem to work anyway damn hard.
I think the work ethic's pretty strong.
Yeah.
Singapore seems to be economically very successful, very successful. Geographically, of course, it's very small. Many South Australians and many Australians probably wouldn't realise that the land area of Singapore equates to about 1/8 of the size of Kangaroo Island. And it has a population of in excess of 6 million. And it has a GDP, not as much as Australia, but it kind of is. It's a pretty healthy economy, I must say. So it really is a financial centre and a shipping centre.
Yes. And it's also a travel centre too, and people
yes, it is.
Just go via Singapore, probably just for the really interesting sort of romantic business of visiting that city. It's a beautiful place.
And it's efficient.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what a lot of people say about Singapore, but Changi Airport is just super efficient.
And it's clean, and it's ordered.
You're in and out of there in minutes.
Yeah.
So it's terrifically efficient. So, and for a lot of international travellers, when they're kind of, using Singapore as a stopover to go somewhere else, they enjoy it.
You get people criticising Singapore because you can't spit on the pavement and you can't chew gum and park it somewhere on a park bench or whatever. But... or graffiti. I don't know what they do with graffiti people, vandals, but it wouldn't be pleasant. That's my kind of city.
Have you read the memoirs of Lee Kuan Yew?
I've spoken to him. Most impressive man. He was out here.
When did you speak with him?
This would have been probably in the early 80s.
Right.
Maybe. He came to Australia and he did I don't know what the real purpose of the tour was, but he did a bit of television and he did a bit of radio. And he I don't know that he came to Adelaide, but we talked to him on the telephone, as I remember.
Did you? Oh, what a privilege. Well, I would credit Lee Kuan Yew as being one of the most outstanding, if not the singularly most outstanding world leader. He built a country...
out of nothing.
Out of nothing. Yeah. And the story is incredible. So 1965, when Singapore secured independence through a fairly tumultuous process from Malaysia, because of course it was part of Malaysia, he kind of built or inherited, so to speak, a country and had to start from scratch. Had a population, I think at that time, of about 1 million. It was always very well located because of its kind of shipping prowess through the Malacca Straits, and that's kind of been the situation for centuries, obviously. But it's always been a very kind of, from the days of the Portuguese, it's been a very strong shipping place.
And a very strategic one as well.
But what a lot of people don't realise is that it has literally zero natural resources. So to build a country that has the prosperity, the wealth, the entrepreneurship that Singapore has, quite literally out of nothing, is amazing. And it makes you reflect upon how indeed lucky we are as Australians.
We take it for granted, though.
Because we're just endowed with so much natural resource when the Singaporeans have done it out of sheer ingenuity and grit. It's extraordinary. And unusually, the private enterprise is very strong in Singapore, but that wasn't always the case. It was actually the government leading the charge of entrepreneurship. So they built things which we now kind of know very, very well, like large organisations, like, Singapore Airlines is a very well-respected global airline, and that's government-owned. But so many of the state assets, they have energy companies and water companies and a whole range of things. So they haven't privatised everything, and they're competitive, they're price competitive, but their government agencies are very, very businesslike. They compete on a commercial footing.
They understand the real world. The word that comes to mind when I sit here remembering Lee Kuan Yew. I don't know if his son is probably cut from the same cloth. I don't know, but he was the man. But he was inspirational. I remember him telling me that he'd run the whole gamut from being a communist, a revolutionary, a socialist.
Interesting.
A capitalist. And I said, "So what are you now?" And he said, "Oh, that's easy. I'm a nationalist."
Interesting.
I like that. I mean, that's what we all should be.
Yeah.
One nation.
Yes.
Focused on the success of the country and its people.
He was always enduringly focused on Singapore, and building Singapore, strengthening its economy, strengthening its communities. Because Singapore's a melting pot. You've got Chinese, you've got Malays, you've got Indians, it's a real melting pot.
But no conflict, no harmonious.
Zero. It is the most harmonious city that you could really think about.
How do you do that? How do you actually bring all these elements together and not have the old argument?
Look, I've read every book that Lee Kuan Yew has written, and he's very strident, he's very poignant about how he did that. He said things like, which raised some people's eyebrows, but you've got to admire the pragmatism of the man. First and foremost, he said, children are never racist. Never.
No, they learn it.
So he said that having schools, learning institutions, churches, everything else, they have to be multi-ethnic.
Yes.
And he was very, very strong about that.
One tribe.
Even the social housing in Singapore, whereby lots of folks in Singapore live in kind of government-built housing.
Yeah.
And they would even balance the housing in Singapore based upon the ethnic mix of the country. So to give you an example, so if 30% of the country was Chinese extraction and 30% was Malay and 30% was Indian, that would be actually the mix in the housing. And he always said things like, when people grow up smelling each other's food and eating each other's food, he said, you don't have these social problems.
Yeah. You remember his much reported comment when he was here on that visit. He warned, maybe he had sort of quietly had a look around Australia, I don't know, before he started doing interviews. But he said that Australia ran the risk of it becoming the white trash of Asia.
Famous comment. Absolute famous comment.
I wonder if anybody took any notice of it.
He wrote a book which I read last year, which was written, I'm going to suggest it was probably late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
He would have been relatively elderly at that stage.
Yes.
And he wrote a book which was foreshadowing what most of the major countries around the world, where they would be in 2025 to 2030.
Mm-hmm.
And I read it, and it was remarkably accurate.
Mm.
It was talking about China, the US, it was talking about Japan, it was talking about India, it was talking about Australia, it was talking about Israel, it was talking about Germany, the UK, the neighbouring countries. And there's a chapter on each country. I mean, the vision is incredible to be able to foreshadow with I would suggest, a fairly accurate lens what the reasons why, and demographics and governments and politics.
If only the right people would read that book.
Location. I would say it's interesting reading his background, and it's interesting reading his political persuasions, but I would actually call him just a pragmatist. He was just ultimately pragmatic. What does Singapore need to do to build its capacity, to build its prosperity, to build its community, to build its infrastructure, to build its influence in the region? And he'd just do it. And he would be criticised along the way, he'd be applauded along the way, but he still did it. And the proof is many ways in the pudding. Now, I respect the fact that every country is different, but we can learn some things from Singapore because that pragmatism, that cut-through, really has turned Singapore into a very influential country, and certainly a very prosperous one.
You get itchy feet in the sense that you look around at what could be and what should be in terms of South Australia in particular, with its potential. I think it has huge potential. I don't know about the people who are running it at the moment, or even the people who are standing in opposition saying, oh, well, we can do it better. I think you would make a wonderful Premier.
Thank you, Jeremy.
That's
from left of field.
No, no, I've always said it to you that you should be in politics. I don't think it would matter what party it was. You would simply run a better ship.
I'm an interesting cat politically, and I've often shared this with people because I'm conservative but progressive in the same breath.
You can be. There's nothing wrong with that.
And that's my pragmatism.
Yeah.
Is I'm actually economically relatively conservative. But there are some issues which I identify with which I will kind of progress. So I'm a bit of a balanced scorecard in many ways, but ultimately I'm pragmatic. So thank you for that comment. I'm not quite sure if that's on my radar.
Well, you're still a young man. You're still a young man. You can do this. There's plenty of time. What would Genevieve say?
Of course, look, Genevieve is my greatest source of support. And Genevieve has a very global attitude.
Yeah.
Genevieve's lived in the US, she lived in the UK. Of course, she was born in Singapore. She owned a company in Singapore. She had businesses across Malaysia and Indonesia and various places.
Wow.
New Zealand. So she's kind of very accomplished in her own right as an entrepreneur. And so, but she's a great source of support. But, I mean, Genevieve has this kind of unique philosophy that you've just got to live every day to the absolute fullest.
Yeah.
You know, so, and, you know, I subscribe to that.
Yeah, I don't blame you. But talking about the state, I've never heard of the Watervale Hotel in Clare. Have you?
Oh, it's a great hotel.
Oh, it seems to be.
Yes.
Apparently it has been named, just in the last, 24 hours, it has been named the best culinary experience in the world.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it means it's got the best hotel kitchen in the world. I don't know. But it's chosen by Lux Life Magazine Travel and Tourism Awards for 2023. And it was also awarded the best hotel restaurant of the year in the Global Corporate Live Wire Awards. I mean, there's a bit to unpack there, but it certainly sounds like it's worth a visit.
My cousins come from a town called Riverton, which is
I know Riverton, yeah.
on the way.
Yeah.
And we had lunch at the Watervale Hotel, I'm going to guess 4 years ago.
Yeah.
I must say the kitchen is incredible. It really is for a regional hotel or for anything.
Yeah.
It's actually extraordinary. It's a wonderful, and the meal was good. So
You want to take a call, Lord Mayor?
Please do.
Hello?
Morning, Jeremy.
John. John.
How are you?
Martin Haese is with me, so you're talking to us both. What would you like to say?
Well, I hope he's voting no.
Well, I haven't asked him yet.
I sense we're going to get to that, John.
We're going to get to it, are we?
How are you, John?
I'm very well, thank you. This referendum, I noticed this morning on another radio station.
Is there another radio station?
A radio station, yeah. That they're bringing up about it's not for the benefit of those Indigenous people that are voting no or those who are voting yes. It's for the children of the future, the Indigenous children of the future.
Yeah. Well,
drawing it out at the last minute.
Look, they'll try anything, and if you were listening to the ABC, it's quite relentless, their campaigning. I can't believe that they're allowed to get away with it.
Well, they say that the Prime Minister is here in the Central Market here in Adelaide again, trying to drum up voters that haven't made a commitment as yet. You know?
Yeah, well, good luck to him, I say, sympathetically. Can't imagine why he'd invest so much political capital.
Yeah. And just on another thing, this issue that's going on over in Israel and Palestine,
yeah.
You know, shocking, absolutely shocking. And I honestly believe that they say that they don't mind having peaceful protests here, but gee, how can they remain peaceful with what's happening? And I'm talking with both sides now. You can't remain peaceful.
No, and I don't know what Martin thinks, but I feel that in behind all of this, Hezbollah and Hamas, I think the people in behind are the Iranians, and they have their own agenda. And if the Israelis decide to bomb the bejesus out of Iran, well, it's on for one and all, isn't it?
Well, it will be, yeah. And, you know... let's face it, I can't believe that, you know, prior 1948, they all lived up in there and it was reasonably peaceful. The Jewish people lived amongst the Arabs and there was no problem.
Well, what went wrong?
As soon as they made the State of Israel, that's where it started to come undone. You know, because... they sort of cut some of the Palestinian land out and, you know, then the feud started. Yeah, and it's been going on ever since and probably will. I don't think it'll ever stop.
Yeah.
That's my personal opinion, you know.
Well, tribes don't get on with other tribes. In fact, you can relate that back to Australia. There are some 400 Aboriginal tribes, and believe me, they don't all get on with each other or agree with each other. Some of them don't like each other for historical reasons, others for all kinds of territorial reasons. I don't know what you do with human nature. Somebody once told me that human nature was an interesting mixture of jealousy, vanity, lust and greed.
And that's probably a good statement, Jeremy.
Yeah, well, good or not, I think it's probably true. John, listen, I got to move on. Martin Haese is my special guest, and if you would like to speak with him, you can give us a call on 049 65 68 60.
You're listening to the Court of Public Opinion with Jeremy Cordeaux, where the time is 10 a.m. Australian Central Standard Time.
Hey! What's the weather for the weekend gonna be? Will it be hot, cold, rain, snow?
And the weather today in Adelaide, it will be a cloudy day.
You may not find us on your TV, because in case you did not know, we're being brought to you by, brought to you on, brought to you by RADI.
Brought to you on RADIO. Indeed. And when we say it's 10 o'clock, Martin, it's a bit difficult because we have listeners in Tokyo, we have listeners in South America, we've got listeners in Sydney and up on the north coast of New South Wales. So it's rather arrogant of us to give the time as central.
We said Central Standard Time.
Central Standard Time, yeah, well, wherever you are, whatever the time of day is, and whatever the weather is like, but as we said, it's cloudy here. I don't think it's going to rain like hell yesterday, but I think it's a nice day. Every day in South Australia, Lord Mayor, is a nice day.
Every day is a wonderful day.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more.
I like the American tradition of when you've been the president or you've been the governor, you keep that title for life.
Yes, that's
I
correct.
like that.
Correct.
So, Lord Mayor, until you become the Premier, we'll just call you Lord Mayor.
Well, that's right. I'll take that as a thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you very much.
Well, as the former Lord Mayor, what do you think of the city at the moment? Do you look at it and think favourably, or do you look at it and think critically?
I'm a city resident.
Yes.
And have been for many years. So I now look at the City of Adelaide through that lens mostly.
Yeah.
And I think the incumbent Lord Mayor is doing a reasonable role. And it's a role which I was Lord Mayor, of course, from 2014 to 2018.
Yeah.
And it's a role which, to so many ways, working with your fellow elected members, you so much get to design, not in your own image, but you certainly get to kind of design and influence a whole range of outcomes. So I was very strong on the economic side of the City of Adelaide, but it didn't mean for a second that I wasn't kind of focused on the details. So there were things like just the presentation of the city, the garden maintenance, the flowers, the verges, the trees, and all of it. I must say I was relentlessly focused on that. So you do move from what I would call macro issues to micro issues within the same kind of sentence often when you're the Lord Mayor of Adelaide, because your remit's relatively wide. Some would suggest that it's a roads, rates and rubbish role. But I would kind of equally suggest that for a capital city council, although those three things are vitally important and I would never discount them, I would say that there is more opportunity to kind of be of greater influence than that. So I was kind of very focused on the competitiveness of the city, the economic prosperity of the city, making sure that those people that took a risk and were operating a business in the city were supported by the council, and that council understood their challenges. Council could provide the appropriate infrastructure or services to help them do what they do best, which is build their business. I was very, very focused, and this is something I learned from Genevieve, Jeremy, is that she said it's always good to look at a city through the eyes of a tourist because you have this kind of objectivity where you look at something as a tourist and you appreciate it or you don't, or you're often quite clear about what's good about a city when you're looking at it kind of once removed. It's an interesting way of looking at life. But so occasionally I would look at that. I'd kind of walk down the street and say, if I was coming to Adelaide for the first time, what would I think of that? Yeah. If we look at something which is, let's say there's a part of the city which is just substandard, you walk past something enough times, Jeremy, and it just normalises.
Yeah, sure.
You don't even see the faults because you've seen it so many times. So when a fresh set of eyes comes in, i.e. a tourist, and they look at something and say, why do they do it that way?
Yes.
That could be so much better.
Good idea, good line.
So
look at things like a tourist, yeah.
I would often do that. And so that's why, yes, I'm remarkably things like pro-technology, and we laid out the 10 gigabit Adelaide fast data network throughout the whole CBD. That was a very ambitious project. But I must say I'm equally pro things like heritage,
yes,
parklands preservation, which doesn't make me old-fashioned. It's just that I think they're important.
Yes.
And I think that if you expend your history,
yes,
what kind of society are you building? So I'm a great believer in protecting, the great parts of South Australian history.
Here's a dilemma. The mounted police stables and infrastructure that they have down there at the It's the old Adelaide jail, I guess it would be, wouldn't it?
Adjoining, yes.
Yeah, they want that land for the new children's hospital.
Correct.
And they're kind of doing this argy-bargy arguing thing about where to put... And they do need those horses, the greys, I think, for many different reasons. And to put them out at Jepp's Cross seems to be a very strange compromise. Surely there would be a place in the parklands, or maybe, Wayville Showground, or maybe the Army Barracks at Keswick, or somewhere close to town where they would be used. I don't know what role the town hall plays in making a decision or vetoing ideas that may come up. But what would you do about that?
I think Town Hall would probably got a fair bit of influence over an issue like that. I'll break that discussion into two parts. When it comes to the police horse greys being on the parklands, I would be concerned if anybody had a concern or reservation about that. I think more of the consternation was about the supporting infrastructure and buildings. I don't think it's about the horses as much. So, and I must say, I'm not overly privy to what they were proposing to build. I would always say that if the infrastructure is harmonious with the parklands themselves, so that that takes good architecture, and it's not too oppressive on the parklands. I always kind of put the reasonableness test to this. It's possibly acceptable, but I don't have all the facts. So I never saw the plans as to what was proposed being built. So I think this discussion is a lot more than the horses, because I really would find it difficult that any reasonable person would object to police greys being on the parklands. But I think it's the built form. I think it's the buildings which were accompanying it. And they may have been fairly large, but I don't know.
Yeah, but then you look at the huge building there in Victoria Park for the race meeting, and you think to yourself, "My God, it's an obstruction, but it's also a monstrosity." But apparently that got through. I don't know. I mean, it's historic, I suppose.
Oh, it's been there a long time, and it's temporary. It gets built and demounted. It's an enormous job.
But isn't that a crazy idea, to put it up and take it down, put it up, take it down?
But these motoring events, and I think they're good for South Australia, and there's a number of them.
Yeah.
So we've got the community events like All British Day, which is a wonderful event at Echunga every year. We've got, of course, the statewide event, Bay to Birdwood, which is coming up this month.
Are you going?
I'm unfortunately not going to be here at that time. Otherwise, I would be there with bells on, being a classic motoring enthusiast.
Yep.
But we have, I think, about 130 plus car clubs across South Australia. We have the Adelaide 500, we have the Adelaide Motorsport Festival, we have the Adelaide Rally. And South Australia is really kind of conducive to this. Our topography, our climate, but what it does, and this is interesting. So this is really from the horse's mouth, Jeremy. I was in Singapore on one of my recent trips, and this would have been in July. And I was sitting with a gentleman who owns a fairly substantial building in Adelaide and is doing a lot of things to add value to that building. I walked past it only 2 weeks ago, and it's got scaffolding on it, and they're really improving this building. So he's investing back into South Australia. And he sat with me and he said, "Yeah, it's interesting." He said, "I watch South Australia from afar, and we have investments in other parts of Australia, and we have investments across Southeast Asia and beyond." And he said, "Do you know what's really differentiating South Australia up here?" And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "Well, it's not what you think. It's not infrastructure." He said every government will do infrastructure projects, as important as they are, but they don't really differentiate too much. He said, "It's your events calendar." He said Live Golf, Adelaide 500, Adelaide Fringe, Adelaide Festival, WOME Adelaide, Adelaide Rally, all of these events which are kind of, and we've got a lot of events across the Adelaide calendar. He said that's actually getting tangible cut through up here, and meaning Singapore, Southeast Asia. He said a lot of people are talking about it. And he said that's good for the brand of South Australia. He said it will be good for tourism in South Australia, and I would suggest that would ultimately translate to being good for investment into South Australia or collaborations with South Australian companies. And it wasn't the answer I was expecting to hear, but it was nice to hear. And I actually shared that with the Premier. I said, because I know he's very, very, very proactive in kind of bringing the event calendar to South Australia. And I think he was pleased to hear that feedback. So that was unsolicited feedback from a very successful fund manager.
So the money we spend on these events is well spent.
Look, I actually think it's very well spent. And in the largest scheme of things, as much as sometimes we think, oh, that's a lot of money, in the larger scheme of things, in comparison to what it can catalyse, it's money well spent.
One of the things that I've heard, I haven't had it confirmed, but somebody told me that in Singapore you are not allowed to, you can't own a car without putting $125,000. You're smiling, so it's true. You've got to put $125,000 on the table before you can even buy a car.
Jeremy, this is the pragmatism of Lee Kuan Yew. Now, this would make many South Australians and many Australians and some of your global listeners fall off their chair.
Yeah.
However, when you have a country, a city-state, an island city-state, which is 1/8 of the size of Kangaroo Island, the most precious commodity is land.
Yeah.
Now, Lee Kuan Yew used to say that if every Singaporean wanted to drive a car, no Singaporean would be able to drive a car. Because the island would just become gridlock. So what they do, Jeremy, and you're exactly right, they have a mechanism called a COE, a Certificate of Entitlement, and which means that you apply for a COE that enables you to go and buy a car.
Oh.
It's not your registration, it's not your insurance, it's none of that. You need this before you go and buy a car. Now, a COE, the government's just put the price of a COE up to 150,000 Australian dollars.
150, wow.
And you have a COE for 10 years and then you've got to go buy another one. And the price of the COE is regulated by this quasi-auction system, whereby if demand drops for cars, they might reduce the price of the COE. If demand for cars goes up, they'll increase the price.
Well, it's such a wealthy place. I mean, last time I was there, every single car was a Mercedes or a Rolls.
Yes. So here's the irony. So you buy your COE, then you go and buy your car. When you buy your car, you then pay 500% luxury goods tax on your car.
Don't make it easy, do they?
So if you start doing the maths on that, if you'd like to buy a Toyota Corolla, it'd probably cost you north of 200,000 Australian dollars. And as a consequence of that, you don't see too many Corollas, but you do see a lot of luxury cars.
Yeah.
So it's to counter all of that, what they do, and they're very transparent about this, they say with all of the taxes that we collect, we will build the most efficient underground public transport system, the MRT, the Mass Rail Transit, I think it's called. And it's this quite literally 3-level underground, air-conditioned, state-of-the-art rail system that runs like a Swiss watch that goes in all directions and around the island. And I cannot tell you how many billions they must have spent on this. And they regulate the price of taxis. So taxis are very affordable. There are plenty of them. And the mass transit system is super efficient. So you can exist in Singapore perfectly without having a car. You don't need one.
No, but if you liked an old car, as you and I both do, would you be allowed to have an old car?
Well, yes, I do collaborate with a very good friend of mine in Singapore who is the president of the Singapore Classic Car Club.
Oh, I
and
see.
I often see him when I go to Singapore. And yes, you can. They have special discompensation for cars over, I'm guessing, 30 years. It's still not inexpensive. Car prices are astronomical, tax or no tax in Singapore. But you can have them. And there's actually a growing number of them on the road.
Would you like another cup of coffee?
Oh, I'd love one.
Ah, wonderful. Thank you, Miss Caroline. Thank you. Yes, well, yeah, look, it all makes sense, but I just live in fear that these people with their climate change mantra and all of that stuff, they're going to say that old cars are off the road. Well, you know, in London, apparently, you're not allowed to have an internal combustion engined car in the city of London.
Yes, they have the exclusion zone, and you pay tax. Yes.
Yeah. So what about the Jensen? What about the Jag? What are you going to do?
I know.
What am I going to do?
Well, I think, Jeremy, I think we're at a bit of an inflection point. This is a really interesting discussion, and a very topical one. my own view.
Yeah.
Will we end up with a world with purely electric vehicles? In my opinion, absolutely not.
No, I agree with that.
Because I think what the consequence of that, and I've driven electric vehicles. Some of them are wonderful, but you, again, think about the economics of it all.
And the battery 10 years down the track?
Correct. And the pressure that this is going to put onto the grid. So if tomorrow morning every vehicle in our city and the city of our listeners was all of a sudden electric, the grid would collapse. Yeah. So I think what's going to counter that is the emerging technology or the emerging market of what's called synthetic fuel. So many of your listeners would have heard of biofuel, which is fuel made from organic matter. Synthetic fuel is very different to that. Synthetic fuel is actually man-made fuel, and it's been proven. There's a UK company that's flown a RAF jet on pure synthetic fuel, not blended. And if you follow the cues of maybe the aviation industry, I mean, we're not going to have electric planes. There's a very practical reason for that. They're too heavy.
Sure.
If you follow the cues of the aviation industry is kind of one of the sectors which will need to decarbonise and are looking for ways to do it.
Yeah.
They won't be electric. They, in all probability, won't be hydrogen. They won't be biofuel. So their only plausible technology is synthetic fuel. So basically it's making petrol through a chemical process as opposed to extracting it from
And
the
we
ground.
could run our old cars on that, do you think?
It's a complete seamless transfer. You could go to the service station and not have it to do anything to the distribution.
Well, we should be working on that. I mean, somebody should be working on that as an alternative because
it's proven. It's just not at the current level, of course, economic, because the price per litre would be very, very high. But with volume, price will come down. So I think that's one to watch. Yeah. I think it's one to watch. And I read widely about what impact this may have on the classic car movement. And there's a peak body in the UK who's called the Historic Federation Society of Motoring Vehicles or something to that end. I think I've got that wrong. But they wrote a really interesting piece about all of this, about, the classic car movement employs a lot of people. It's got a big supply chain. There are parts manufacturers, you name it. It creates a lot of jobs and it's very good for tourism. So they're not going to let it go. I think they'd be crazy.
No. Just on the transport thing, what do you think of these scooters, these purple bloody things that are everywhere and anywhere, hanging in trees, thrown into ponds? I don't understand it. Isn't that littering?
I was in Singapore a couple of years ago.
Don't tell me they do it.
They did it.
Oh, they did it.
Then they banned it. So I said to someone, where have all the scooters gone?
Yeah.
No, they're gone. They banned them. So
pragmatic, I like it.
They were ending up in the canals and
yes.
various places, and the government stepped in and said, no, not for us.
Yeah, well, I think you give something a reasonable go, and then when experience points you in a different direction, you go.
Yep.
What do you think about, got to ask you, about this referendum tomorrow? What would you think of it?
Well,
some pearls of wisdom, please.
Here's my conservative nature, but my progressive nature rolling out at the same time, I think. So when I was Lord Mayor of Adelaide, I chaired an organisation called the Reconciliation Committee, which has been set up at City Council for many, many years. And I must say I learnt an enormous amount about Indigenous culture, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But I believe in unity. I always have. I've been consistent about this. Whether I was in Lord Mayor, I was managing Rundle Mall, or Chief Executive Officer of Business SA. I think the greatest way to achieve anything is to bring everybody together.
Being inclusive, I like it.
Yeah, being inclusive.
Under one flag, hopefully.
And I'm very passionate about this because I'm very passionate about South Australia. So I have the greatest respect for Indigenous Australians, but I equally so believe that we need to be one peoples,
yes,
one community,
yes,
and first and foremost to identify ourselves as Australians. I think that's really, really important.
All of us, yes.
All of us.
Yes, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Irrespective of our ethnicity or our creed.
Wouldn't it be simple just to have that as a philosophy?
And you see this around the world in different places where people will say, I'm a American Italian, or I'm a Greek Australian. Well, I would say yes, you are, but you're an Australian Greek, and I think that's really, really important. I think it's a key but subtle point of difference. I think first and foremost we are all Australians, whether we have been here when you're nationalised, whether you've been here for 5 years or for 50,000, we're Australians, and I think that's how you build a united country.
I like the way you think. And I want to sit, before I die, I want to be sitting somewhere and say, Mr. Premier, welcome to the dining room table if we're still here. And if you need somebody to hand out how to vote things, give me a call.
As you can see, I'm letting that one through the keeper.
I noticed. Martin Haese, ladies and gentlemen.
Do you want to make a real impact in your community? Sponsor Jeremy Cordo's The Court of Public Opinion and be a part of something special. Connect with engaged listeners, showcase your brand, and support informed discussions.
Yes, look, I've been loving watching it. It's a true breath of fresh air.
Oh, well, I'm glad you found me.
Make your mark on Jeremy Cordo's The Court of Public Opinion, where voices matter.
Jeremy, I think it's wonderful that you're able to do this because you have such wonderful history. You have a great connection with your audience. There are still many, many, many people who love you, and it's just great that you and others who may be in a similar position, who aren't working for a commercial station anymore, can do it and continue to do what they love doing, and not just for you, but for the listeners.
Sponsorship opportunities are limited. Act now and be part of the conversation.
Please join us. We'd love to have you.
Simply visit jeremycordo.com and click on sponsor.